I think social networks, they say they don't die with a bang, they die with a whimper. So is this just another kind of slow whimper there?
Welcome to Punchy by Rival, where we take the gloves off to share the hard-hitting realities of the challenger marketing world. Each week, we'll break down the buzz and cut through the BS of the top stories and trends to tell you what you really need to know and do differently to grow your brand and career. All right, we are live with a very special, very sunny Wednesday edition of Punchy. We are here in Turkey. Clearly, I drew the short straw on locations for this recording. Although what y'all didn't see is that I was scrambling up until the last minute, a beautiful spot up on the balcony, and then the Wi-Fi didn't reach. But we are here in Kalkan, Turkey for our first Rival retreat. So we got the whole team down here in Turkey for the week. I think everybody else is at the beach at this point, but we are here doing our recording. And yes, we actually have done some real work this week. Dubose, I'm starting to get a little bit worried we might actually get a tax bill from the Turkish government for how much time you're spending in this country. But do you want to expand on how your experience has been and why we ended up in Turkey?
I mean, Merhaba, Eric. Merhaba, everyone. So, yeah, I think Turkey's an interesting one. I've been here twice this year while working remotely, and it's an amazing place. The people are wonderful, and it's unseasonably warm early and later in the year, which you would assume would be like kryptonite to a redheaded person. But I really turned into the skid on this and just started monitoring moles religiously. So it's one of those things where it's a wonderful place to work and live. The internet is strong, and so I was already here, and everyone else kindly decided to come join me on the month I was here for a week of working together. So it's been great here at the Rival Mansion in Kalkan, Turkey.
Keep up that mole monitoring. Jenna, your first experience in Turkey as well as mine. How's it been?
I did a cannonball into the pool 15 minutes ago, so I'm doing great.
Amazing. All right, let's get into it. So no guests today because we had to switch around the schedule. So we got a story from each of us. So we're going to kick things off with the story from you, Jenna, which is from Adweek. Meta introduces more places to advertise brand safety controls amid macroeconomic headwinds. So Meta is making a slew of new spaces available for advertisers on both the Explore page on Instagram, Facebook Reels, creator pages. There's some specifics about what those ads will actually look like and the revenue split between creators and Meta, which would be 55% to the creators and 45% to Meta. They're still working on some of the specifics about the revenue share. It seems like this is a push to try to bump up their advertising revenue. They're obviously doing this amidst a hiring freeze and economic downturn when a lot of brands are cutting their advertising spend. And then, of course, there's the whole big picture transition of Facebook into what Mark Zuckerberg hopes can be a leading Web3 company. So, Jenna, 1 minute on the clock. What is your hot take on this article?
My hot take is that this article is the definition of buried the lead, because actually literally you have to click continue reading twice on this one, and the most interesting parts of this article come after you click both times in the continue reading, which my big takeaways were from this, like I said, that are quoted much further down in the article are: why the fuck can't Facebook figure out their fucking core ad product before they're introducing new things? I feel very passionately about this, as we can tell. And second of all, actually, one of the other things that they introduced was that finally, actually, in-feed brand safety controls are coming from a couple places. They're getting IIS and double verification. I think it's debatable how actually functionally valuable those things are, but those are really big. But I do think that this is kind of, one part of like a larger trend in the industry. And I think it is correct that this got tied to larger macroeconomic headwinds. This does kind of mirror a little bit, I think, the strategically much worse decision that YouTube made recently, where they've now started stacking 5 unskippable ads prior to some YouTube inventory. I think, like I said, we're going to see a lot of advertisers starting to add new placements like this to make more money.
So just talking about the brand safety updates. So from the article, for the first time, brands will be able to control control content adjacency in the Instagram and Facebook feeds according to the brand safety risk tolerance, which will either be low, medium, or high. The brand safety standards have been specified by the WFA, that's the World Federation of Advertisers, and brands will also have access to third-party reporting to hold Meta accountable and know where their ads appear. So how different is this from what brands had access to or could do before? Like, is this a meaningful difference on this front? And I feel like we've been talking about this for a long time. Like any context or any opinion from you on why it's taken so long?
The big difference for this is that this is now like essentially feed-based placements like this, again, where things like appear like in the feed of Reels or whatever else, have typically resisted traditional brand safety placements because the other placements within the feed are dynamically generated, right? Like it's much harder, or excuse me, it's much easier for you to say for your programmatic, what is the content of the New York Times article that I'm appearing on, because you can look at the keywords essentially that appear in the article. For feed-based things, how do I know that immediately, like when I'm scrolling through my Reels, that the first thing I see is maybe a piece of content that someone posted from a bar in Turkey where they were doing something ridiculous, and then immediately after that comes an ad, and maybe that's not what considered a brand safe placement. This is different. I won't open the can of worms about how effective IAS or Double Verify or other brand safety platforms are or aren't, but this is a fairly significant step forward in feed-based brand safety controls as a new thing.
Great. Dubose, how far can you count in Turkish? I know you've got 1, 2, 3.
That would be bira, iki, uch. I believe dirt is either 4 or 5, and then there is an eddy and a yeti that get us to 7. It is a beautiful language. I'm not doing it justice, but yeah, I can almost get up to the 5-second 5 stacked ads that Jenna was mentioning earlier, which isn't a pre-roll. That's just a roll. You're into the roll now. Like that's too many ads. And I think there's a certain point where Yeti.
I'm gonna Yeti points for you, Jenna. We're only going up. We're only giving points in Turkish on this episode.
Wait, how many was that? I wasn't listening.
7.
7. All right. Okay.
Unless you know 10. Do you know 10, Dubose?
I know 10. It's on.
On. You get on points, Jenna. I thought that was a really good answer and conversation. Dubose, please continue. 1 minute for you.
No, fine. I'm aiming for on points as well now instead of ooch or possibly icky points. So, gosh, I think, the biggest thing for me about this story, Jenna's hit the nail on the head when it comes to the kind of functional aspects of this. I think the thing that surprises me is in an economic downturn, I think there's an interesting point that brands that refocus on their core proposition and sharpen that come out more successfully than brands that try to diversify into new things. I think it's interesting how we classify this to kind of look at that. That kind of insight comes from a Bain study of 2002 and the economic downturn there, where they basically went brands that like Kmart went and bought loads of retailers, ended up spreading themselves too thin. Whereas brands that kind of really revised their core value prop managed to double down in a way where they provided a value to make up for the economic pressures that their customers were feeling. I wonder for something like this, if it is a useful stimulus in the face of already rising competition from TikTok and others, for Facebook to sit down and go, what are the features we should have probably added earlier? And how can we start to balance out, the disproportionate focus they've had on the feed versus the kind of advertiser experience?
Wait, I'm sorry. So is your thesis that this is them refocusing on their core proposition or not?
I think this is them refocusing on their core proposition. I think going for something wider would be metaverse ads. Someone had to be stopped at some point with let's do some augmented reality versus something like brand safety, which at least in the way I see it is part of the core proposition and increasing their kind of core value prop.
To advertisers, but I feel like, I don't know, to me, their core value prop is to users, and then advertisers buy it. And frankly, I think that this is going to have the opposite effect. I think with the addition of these placements, they talk about the rev share that they're offering with creators that I think is below par, below industry standards for what TikTok is offering and for their creator program and a couple other things, and that more ad placements make people dislike the experience more at the same time as they're also going up, all in on this metaverse nonsense. I don't know. I think that it's definitely not circling the drain. And I know it's always easy to be a naysayer like on Facebook. Like there's been, years and years of like, is Facebook like finally like on the cloud? Is this the Facebook killer? Like, da, da, da. These things to me do not say, yeah, this is a business that's like definitely like tightening up. It's like a proposition and I expect it to do better in the coming years. This is a weird edge play, flail around for like immediate, like, scrounge the spare change out of the couch cushions move to me. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you raised two interesting points there. A, do they need to go further? Because actually the big villain here probably isn't economic downturn. It's the idea that other people are eating their lunch on like a better proposition. And B, if this is the start of something, does it start to get them further? Or, I think social networks, they say they don't die with a bang, they die with a whimper. So is this just another kind of slow whimper there?
So is that how that phrase was originally done? Social networks die with a bang. That was the original phrasing of that. Got it. Okay.
That's how I like to quote the Latin. That's the original Latin. Yes, Jenna.
So I just did a quick search, and Hannah, maybe you can double check me and drop it in the chat if I'm wrong. I believe the TikTok creator program shares 50-50 on the advertising revenue. So actually this program, if Facebook is giving 55% to creators, would actually be a little bit better. But maybe I'm missing something there.
Oh, no, I thought it was 60-40, but yeah, you're probably right then. You're probably right if you're looking at it now.
Yeti points to you, Dubose. That's 7 for those who don't know Turkish. All right, 1 minute for me. Here's what I would say. I think the biggest thing is, yes, you can roll out new ad products, but the problem that I have personally, and that I'm hearing more and more from people, is one, of course, I think less people are spending time, certainly on less time on Facebook, certainly less time on Instagram, and they haven't really found a way to monetize WhatsApp yet. But also there are so many ads in the feeds now. So I'm not sure that creating new placement is really the answer. Some of these new types of content, like the Reels, could potentially be one if it's not as saturated. But for me, just personally going through my Instagram feed, I don't log on to Facebook anymore. I feel like particularly in the last couple of months, there's just been so many more ads that are in there. I don't know what the percentage of content to ads is, but it seems to be increasing a lot recently. I think the creator program could be really interesting if that's really scalable, but I don't know. It does. I mean, Dubose, I think it's interesting to kind of what you said of like, there must be something coming in terms of what's the big reveal of what their advertising product is going to be in the meta play as well. So that's the only thing that I had to add. Let's put 3 minutes on the clock. Any further discussions on this topic that people want to have?
I think this is going to end up as a case study for like rewind 5 years ago. I don't know, 5 to 7 years ago or whatever, when it was like Facebook was like the name of the game, like for social advertising. They were like hoovering up all these dollars, again, both from big advertisers, but also from small businesses. They had all the edge on user adoption versus every single platform. Twitter was their biggest competitor. And honestly, the idea that we ever considered Twitter like a Facebook competitor, I think was just wrong. But like, instead of going down the road of like, Mark Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg's like really intrusive, like privacy, like trampling, like data collection, like model, like for this thing, imagine like if they had like actually leaned more into things around like contextual and like content based like ad products, like when people really were like leaning into Instagram, like for everyday documentation, like of their lives. And if they had gotten into the creator space and like those types of things so much earlier, I just think that like they could have crushed at that game. They could have been so far ahead. They had the advantage and they squandered it because they made bad decisions about what people actually really wanted. That I think that, yeah, they misunderstood what their core proposition actually was. They made short-term, easy decisions. And I think it's going to end up biting them in the ass in 10, 15 years. Now, sooner, I think. I don't know. I'm not good at time estimates.
You raise an interesting point there, because I think there's the idea that not only is this too little too late, this is probably, it feels like, I think as you mentioned, Eric, an incremental tide over thing before there's a big swing to try to change the direction. I think it's interesting that we look at platforms like TikTok, where every action a user does in that kind of stream of videos being served to them creates more contextual information for the platform. It's just generating more opportunity seamlessly to understand what people like, what they'll engage with, where they are. And I think for social networks and where Facebook and Instagram increasingly are, if you're not generating as much data, if you're not generating as much context, then some of these actions are too little too late. When they still had that momentum, when they still had that context to play with, this could have been something that would have been more powerful. Having to wait too long to put it in just means at a certain point, you're just extending down the road to kind of having to make a bigger and bigger, more desperate swing towards something. And I think that's what everyone's kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop on. What's the, okay, cool, that was great, we shored this up, now let's do the Ready Player One ads in the metaverse.
Yeah, it's interesting because it really is kind of a race of whether they can extend the off-ramp of their business for the last 10 years to meet the on-ramp of the business they see or want to be for the next 10 years with the metaverse. And this play, new inventory, new ads and feed, the creator revenue share program is an attempt to extend that ramp, but is it going to go on long enough? I think they just had their first quarter of flat or a decline in revenue, right? First quarter ever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy. All right. Right on time. Do I have to give points to myself?
You could, but I think we'd probably cast out on that.
Dubose, how do you say 1,000,000 in Turkish?
I can't count to
I'm not going
10,
to give points.
so...
I can't give points to myself. Jenna. Oh, what was 10 again?
On.
Icky. Oh,
on.
damn.
Icky
on.
is 2.
On for Jenna. Yeti for Dubose. 10, 7. All right. Moving on to story number 2 from a certain Dubose Cole. Adland needs lazy leaders to overcome the quiet quitting epidemic. This is from Campaign. Quiet quitting is an application of work to rule in which employees work within defined work hours and engage solely in activities within those hours. Despite the name, the philosophy of quiet quitting is not connected to quitting a job outright, but rather doing precisely what the job requires. Previously, Adland has been immersed in a grind celebrating culture, but recently there's been an epidemic of this quiet quitting on the rise. The article argues that it's time for the lazy leaders, quote unquote, to step up. A lazy leader won't be found cogitating in a state of deep thinking. Lazy is a quick, instinctive decision maker. Lazy is generous and humble, never afraid to admit when someone else knows best, and therefore might really fly with a responsibility. They're a great delegator, less sensitive to traditional ego, and need to be overseeing everything, entirely comfortable to pass on responsibility. Why do they call this lazy? I guess that's my first question. But Dubose, this is your article and your 1 minute on the clock.
So first thing, I think alliteration is a powerful tool, but not in this case. I think lazy leaders is probably one of the worst ways to describe the essence of what they're attempting to get at here. But I think even that is fundamentally flawed. I think the industry discussion around quiet quitting has been an intriguing one because I think it highlights some of the fundamental flaws in how advertising treats its employees, down to the idea that just coming in and doing the job you've been asked to do is acceptable. That's not quitting. That's doing the thing you've been asked to do. And I think, it is on us as leaders and not lazy ones to give reasons for people to want to engage further than that or go the extra mile or whatever it is. But we need to be respectful of work-life balance. And I think the interesting thing here is, whatever you call the lazy leader, the core of this article is talking about delegation. And the thing that strikes me is delegation isn't the thing that's going to get us out of this mess. It's the thing that got us into it. The idea of advertising leaders going, okay, I'm going to delegate these decisions to someone else, it rolls downhill to other people. It's just going to extend the amount of time that people will have to work and the obligations that are being handed to them. Leaders need to lean in, not lean out. And I think the terminology and some of the crux of the argument here are both flawed.
Did you just come up with that? Lean in?
It was the slogan for MSNBC 14 years ago. I think it's been long enough. I can make it my own.
All right, I'm gonna go next just to break it up, so you can put 1 minute on the clock for me, please, Hannah. So, is this a pay to play article? Like, I feel like this is almost. I can't imagine the editorial process or meeting to actually publish this article because, first of all, and Jen, I am stealing your quote. I apologize. It's entirely clickbait. It is not lazy at all. There is nothing in here that would represent the definition or understanding of being lazy. It's just to get people to click on the article. And then the other thing is, like, what he talks about is absolutely nothing new. To be a great leader, you need to delegate, you need to say yes, and you need to steal great ideas when you come across them. You need to dream big. I just don't understand what they're actually going for in this article because it's nothing new. It feels very clickbaity. This is the stuff that I really hate about I don't know. There just seems to be so much of this content that is just recycled. It's just the same thing that we talk about all the time, just packaged up in a new way and packaged up underneath kind of clickbaity headlines like lazy leaders or the topics that everybody's talking about, like quiet quitting. So I feel like there's nothing new. There's nothing different. I really don't like this. I don't even know like who this person is, but I am going to look them up. What is the barber shop? Is this an agency owner? Probably. That's all I got.
I mean, it's an agency that's done some good work. I think it's just down to the idea that I think the industry as a whole and the response to quiet quitting and the hand wringing we've had around it over the last few months just shows that I don't think anyone's gotten under the skin of the issues that are causing this thing we're worried about. And instead, we're still walking around it, just throwing different terms and buzzwords at it.
Oh, like how, yeah, this is just yet another article avoiding the basic fundamental truth that our industry thrives on grinding out junior people at low salaries and arbitraging their billable rate. And that the real solution to this problem is to pay juniors more. Is that what you're saying, Dubose? That's what I'm saying. Workers of the world, unite. Do I get my minute now? Should I put my
Get your minute in.
My minute in. Yeah. The lazy thing is to do Dubose's point and Eric's is like this is alliteration gone wrong for the sake of clickbait. I will, however, be a little bit more charitable than either of you. And my original hot take, which is that this is just avoiding like the open like class warfare that goes on between the agency owner class and juniors. But in any case, I will say though that I do think that this is like maybe a little bit of a reaction to something that like I have definitely seen among like holding company leadership. Or at least in organizations that I find are like very like finance driven, like the kind of like nickel and diming like obsession over like agenda points, or again some of the specific things he says here about like spending all this time like prepping for the work, like that so much of like what happens and it's just mind-numbingly awful is grinded out admin work, and that like it needs to be perfect, where people spend way too much time doing that stuff and not some of the big idea stuff. That happens on like the big accounts of like hundreds of people or whatever at the big holding companies, and that should go away. That's going to be my charitable interpretation of this. And I think that there's probably, like I say, a kernel of that should be turned into a different article that's better, that drives that point home a little bit more, because that I think is valid.
I think it's interesting what you're saying there, because it's the idea that well-compensated workers, if we were to kind of alliterate something to kind of set this off, at the end of the day comes from leaders taking risk, not leaders being lazy. It's going to take agency leadership and leaders within an agency at every level asking themselves, what's the best thing you can do for the people reporting into you, not just the thing that feels fast or easy or kind of what's already been done. That's the only way we get change. I think lazy leadership isn't it. It's going to be risk-taking leaders that does it.
But that's my thing, is like that's kind of what he's saying. He just put a completely different label on it, right? Because there is something in there about like thinking big or dreaming big or something like that. Be a big daydreamer.
But dreaming big and taking risk are completely different things.
I don't think they're completely different. They might be different, but they're still kind of in the same general area, right? Of like pushing things to be big, pushing things to be new, pushing things to be different.
I think we've got to go further and go, okay, what are we going to change about the business model? What are we going to change about people's responsibilities and positions? How are we going to work in different ways to where we change work-life balance? We change the value proposition. Yeah. I think the time for dreaming big is always there, but it's not going to be the solution to this in the short or medium term.
But no, but like that again, that's like my read of this is like, hey, spend less time on the meeting follow-up notes, like on like prepping like the agenda or like, whatever else, like, for like spend less time on the mindless admin tasks that I think very often actually middle management tends to focus on, like the most, like on the day-to-day, like the day-to-day nonsense. I used to call it fiddly nonsense. I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't care about fucking call. I don't care about that shit. I want to do, what's like the campaign platform, like kind of deal. I don't really care if like, so I do care if some of those things happen where it's like, the call summary or the handover notes. I don't know why I keep repeating those as like admin tasks, probably because I have to do some of those things right now and I really don't want to do them. But I do think, again, as a charitable interpretation, that was kind of like what I was taking away from this. And I think that that's reasonable. I think that there's at middle management levels at agencies, there's too much focus on that as work when it's really like bullshit, busy work and is not the substance of what we actually do. And that we should do less of that.
All right. Let's move on because we only got 5 minutes left. We got one more article to go to. Yeti points for you. Jenna Dubose, I really don't like this article. And I remember how to say one, which is ooch. So you're going to get ooch points.
Actually, 1 is 3. So I'm going to take those 2. Ooch is 3. 1 is beer. So I'm going to take my 3 points that you've given me.
All right. Moving on. My article from Ad Age, how D2C fitness brand Noble is competing with the giants of athletic apparel. Athletic footwear and apparel have some of the most recognizable brands of any category: Nike, Reebok, Adidas, etc. But one brand inching its way into the mainstream is Noble, which, as its name suggests, has taken a no-gimmick approach to marketing its range of training shoes and workout apparel. It has risen from being a darling among CrossFit enthusiasts to one that is making waves in larger fitness communities. By 2021, Noble was landing key sponsorships with mainstream sports institutions, including the New England Patriots, who happen to be the best football team ever, and the team's starting quarterback, Mac Jones. That April, it completed a fresh round of funding that pushed its valuation to just over $500 million. Hannah, if you could put a minute on the clock for me, I will kick this off. So I've been aware of Noble a little while. I don't talk a lot about CrossFit because while I do CrossFit, I don't think that I'm a CrossFitter. No peanut gallery comments. It's my minute right now. Anyway, what I think is really interesting about this and what I've liked about what Noble has done is, one, they have a very clear point of differentiation in the industry that I feel like a lot of the other incumbents in the space didn't really want to go after, which is that idea of you can't really accomplish anything great in fitness or really anything else without actually putting in the work. And yes, to what we were talking about with like agency culture, hustle culture, etc., maybe there's a little bit of a fine line that they're going to have to walk, but a lot of their advertising, a lot of their positioning has to do with this space that I think was, nobody really owned that. Yeah, Nike is about everybody is an athlete and all that, but it's not really about all the work, the hard work that you put in. The other thing that I think they did a really good job of, and it was kind of organic based on where they came from, because I think the founding team actually came out of Reebok, which was the original and one of the biggest sponsors of CrossFit, is they really took this kind of community bottom-up approach to how they went mainstream. They didn't go straight for the NFL. They didn't go straight for the New England Patriots. They started with CrossFit, a very engaged community, and they built themselves within that community through a lot of athlete endorsements, but not always the top tier athletes. They worked their way up in that as well. So I think it's a great idea of kind of a clear point of differentiation, community driven, bottom up approach to now becoming a true challenger in a very big category. That's my a little bit more than 1 minute. Apologies. Jenna, over to you.
I take your points. I agree with you kind of on the marketing side of this. I don't know, maybe I think that actually maybe my perception of this is my old roommate was a CrossFitter, and I actually would put her in the camp of CrossFitter. And so because I lived with her, I was in the targeting algorithm for Noble because that's how targeting algorithms work. And so I started getting served their ads because I lived with her. The internet is creepy. Algorithms are weird. And actually I like I said, didn't really know a lot of their marketing. I think that, like I said, they were, definitely kind of one of those D2C, I call it the churn and burn, like Instagram, like, ads, like prospecting model that clearly I think worked for them. The part that I was more taken by was, again, like that their products specifically, that they occupy that niche of, again, we want you to have a pair of shoes that you can like do CrossFit in, which is cross functional, like the running and the lifting. Like I have a pair of like the Nike, like weightlifting shoes with like they're the metrics with just like the flat, like the stable part of it, and they're not comfortable to run in. And so for all the marketing, I think that this, like, my real takeaway from this is like, great marketing like has to start with great products. And kind of everything I've heard is that they had really great products, which I think is different for a lot of those D2C brands that frankly, some of them are absolute crap. And these guys, I think, were pretty good. That's my hot take. It's not very hot.
Dubose.
So I am not a CrossFitter. I have never been to CrossFit. I once watched a video about CrossFit. It scared me, and I will never go to CrossFit. However, if I were to take an uninformed view of CrossFit in this, I think the thing that strikes me is I think the product, which I'm not that familiar with, I think is an interesting point where you go, they've built product differentiation, and they've built a strong community around CrossFit. The thing I would argue is I wonder where the ceiling is on a brand like this, because where I would differ from your point of view on this, Eric, is I don't think it's a differentiated brand tone or point of view. I think it's Under Armour, but with slightly less apocalyptic art direction. It's interesting that, putting in the work is the view of most fitness brands. If you think about it, Under Armour's "We must protect this house. The only way is through." You look at kind of Puma with the idea of progress, always faster. There are different ways to talk about the idea that fitness is work that we have to suffer through. And I think this is dangerously in a space where they're not Under Armour enough to move beyond the CrossFit community yet. They're going to have to think about how their tone works there. And they're not mass enough to be able to pivot in an interesting way, especially if the products benefit from having a very special focus where they deliver a very authentic value to a certain community. So I think there's an interesting challenge here that for like a lot of challenger brands, they're going to reach a certain plateau. And then where do they go from there?
Okay, they do actually though have a really cool look and feel. I will challenge you like on the Under Armour one for this, simply again because I've looked at a bunch of their products before. They have some really they have like these cool like rainbow soles. They do have some really, I think, like cool looking products. I did genuinely almost buy a pair just because I thought that they were cool looking. I think that they.
But Dubois is talking about the differentiation in the advertising, in the marketing.
Oh,
how they're going to go recruit more people, right? Like, show me a fitness brand that doesn't look like it's kidding out people for the Hunger Games. Because like that's what we're getting here. Like very much like let's go stab someone on a football pitch is kind of what we're like the vibe that mostly comes through.
But I think that they can change that pretty easy again because they've got different colorways. Like again, like they have like a rainbow like leopard print one that I really like where the soles are really cool. They've got
somebody get this woman some Noble shoes.
I want that. I think this is a sign I gotta buy a pair now because again I'm not crazy about the Nike Metrics ones. So yeah, maybe I will buy a pair.
So I would say I do think it's slightly differentiated, and maybe that's just my association of having them kind of show up in this community that I'm in. But I do think, and maybe it's not a completely white space, but I do think they take it further in terms of it's not like, I don't know, we can get into this debate and you know more about this. And obviously you've been doing some work in this space recently, but I do feel like for them, it's more about the work, the sweat, the blood, sweat, and tears, the long hours in the gym, which a lot of bigger brands aren't willing to take it that far. And I will say in terms of like them going into the NFL, I mean, that's as mainstream as it gets. Of course, they haven't conquered the NFL, but I see them kind of taking the same approach that they did within CrossFit. They sponsored the, what's it called? The like the training day or whatever they do. They're, Mac Jones is not Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers. So they're kind of going bottom up within that community as well.
But it's funny, all right, because I think
go ahead.
You hit a relevance issue at a certain point because the NFL is supposed to be a scale play. It's supposed to be like we are now going to put a brand on a stage where people are going to get it as they're sitting there and watching, their favorite team. And I think the interesting thing of sponsoring something like the Combine is you've invented CrossFit on a football pitch. Like,
but that's my point. Like they're kind of taking the playbook of what worked for them somewhere else and replicating that somewhere new.
But is it how big of a new audience are you reaching is the only thing I'm saying there. Because if you go into a new territory and do the same thing you were doing in an old territory, you're getting incremental returns. You're not expanding the ceiling of the brand.
So, I mean, not if it's interesting. So are you saying that you think there's a big overlap between the CrossFit audience and like the Combine audience?
I am arguing
because if they're doing the same thing but for a new audience, they're reaching new consumers, right? They're shifting perception and behavior within a new market.
I would guess that the people who watch the CrossFit Games and the people who watch what is basically a televised workout day for the NFL, that is a Venn diagram that may look very much like a circle. So. Short of sports bettors and fantasy football fans. So
challenge. Disagree. 2 versus 1. Dubois loses. Dubois gets negative points.
That's how this stuff works. In the absence of facts, we vote democratically. All right, we're going to round it up. You both get 5 points because I can't think of any more Turkish numbers. But Jenna, you are long overdue for a win. What do you want to rant or rave about today? No cannonballing in the pool while we're still on the podcast.
Don't tell me what to do. Okay. Actually, all right. Rant. Google announced that they're killing Google Stadia, which is Google's streaming video game service. And I was a Stadia customer. And so both personally and also professionally, I'm very disappointed by this. I think that, Google's like build it fast, kill it fast, because Stadia really has not been around that long. It's only been a couple years. And frankly, I think that they suffered from a lack of major titles and studio commitments because everyone was afraid that exactly this was going to happen. This is what happened. Video games, gaming is, I think, like the fastest growing, biggest opportunity, like for advertisers, like within marketing, like as a cultural trend. It's absolutely huge. And that streaming is a huge part of that. I really loved it. I like didn't have to carry around like a bulky console, or like even if I didn't want to be on like my Switch, there was other titles that I hadn't had access to. And now it really just leaves, Amazon's version of this is kind of the only competitor in the space. And it's kind of a weird little orphan at Amazon too. I understand that there were technical limitations to it, but this again seems like Google again doesn't really kind of understand like what their core proposition is. They kind of seem to be floundering with these kind of weird fringe bets at the edge of their core advertising product, but not really willing to make the commitments to make those bets work. I think this is really unfortunate. I really love Stadia. I'm super disappointed. And I hope that there's a big competitor for this. I think somebody's going to crack streaming gaming, and that's going to be huge. And I hope it's not Amazon.
All right. That is all that we have for today. I think Dubose needs some more sunscreen. Jenna, you got to get yourself back in the pool. It's been like a full half an hour
It's been
since
awful.
you've been in there. And I think there might be some lamb june downstairs for me. So we're going to wrap it up there. Go meet up with the team. Thanks for tuning in. And we will see you next week when we are, well, we'll still all be in different places, but back to our regularly scheduled time on Thursdays. See you then.
Tashikila, everyone.
Punchy is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with Jenna, Dubose, or myself, email us at media@wearerival.com or find us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.